Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. After Marvel Day on Tuesday, we certainly can't envy any of the other movie franchises out there trying to make a splash publicity-wise in the shadow of Kevin Feige's shock and awe press conference. But two movie franchises did try and stand out from the crowd yesterday, with one I think succeeding more than the other, and that's what we'll start with, although we will discuss both today. So, who won and who managed to get a little bit of attention away from Marvel's big announcement on Tuesday? I would say that's Insurgent, which of course is the sequel to Divergent, the Hunger Games-like franchise from the very same studio. So the way they made a splash was they announced that not only will Insurgent be in 3D, but they released a whole bunch of motion posters to celebrate the announcement. And I thought the motion posters, by the way, were pretty darn cool. I've put a link down below in the video description where you can go and check them out. They're a lot of fun to play with because not only after you see the character come together from a swarm of like metal objects, you can kind of rotate the character a little bit like an old-time hologram. It's almost like a trading card actually when you think about it, just you can't hold it in your hand. But I think it's a great idea, although I have to say it's very interesting that the more fun part of the poster is when it's coming together than when you actually see the character. You're not like, oh wow, it's my favorite character. You're more like, who's that again? What do they do in the movie? I mean, I'm familiar mostly with, of course, Triss and Four, and then Caleb, played by Ansel Elgort, and then Peter by Miles Teller. But everybody else, I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of remember you. Let's go click on another poster and watch it come together. And I was surprised that like Maggie Q got one, and also Zoe Kravitz. Lesser characters, but maybe their roles will be increased in the sequel. But I think it's very telling that Insurgent is going for 3D. 3D is somewhat of like, as we've discussed many times on Movie Math, box office steroids. It's a great way to pump up your box office because it automatically, obviously, raises the ticket price. Now, ideally, what would go hand in hand with that is a better movie-going experience, and sometimes it does. But I think one of the things that's hurt 3D, the technology, is the audience has come to just see it as movie steroids, box office steroids. That it's not used creatively, it's really a financial decision to pump up those numbers that are reported in the trades, etc. So I think that Hollywood has to be careful about using it in such a way because I think it's done a lot of damage to the image of 3D. I guess that's the best way to say it. I also think it's interesting they've never decided to go 3D with the Hunger Games films. I mean, I guess it hasn't needed it, obviously. When you compare the box office, I have the numbers here. The first Hunger Games made $691 million worldwide. That's amazing, especially for a first film in a franchise. Then the second, Catching Fire, made $864 million worldwide. And I think a lot of people are hoping that Mockingjay will reach $1 billion. It'll join the $1 billion club. I'm not sure, though. I'm going to review the trailer today, the final Mockingjay trailer, and I don't quite feel the same excitement I think there was for Catching Fire, and I'll go into why that is in that trailer review. But maybe they could use 3D for the final installment, or maybe they'll feel that it'll look like they're admitting some kind of defeat. We'll see. But in comparison, Divergent made $288 million worldwide. Now, of course, that's not shabby, but I think they see the numbers that it can be if everything was aligned correctly. It should be performing like a Hunger Games. Now, speaking of the Hunger Games, similarities with the Divergent series, I think it's hilarious. When the Triss poster came together, Shailene Woodley's sporting a short haircut. Of course, that's the haircut she has in real life. I guess they needed to do it because of the haircut she got for The Fault in Our Stars. But of course, in the first, the film for Divergent, she had a long ponytail. And there are a lot of similarities and comparisons made between Jennifer Lawrence and Shailene Woodley. They're like, oh, is she the new Jennifer Lawrence? Who's the better actress, etc., etc. I mean, they're very similar. They both have a very strong tween fan base, but yet they're both taken quite seriously as serious actresses. And then I think it's even more hilarious when they have the same haircut. I think that Jennifer Lawrence is obviously letting hers grow out, but as soon as I saw Shailene Woodley as Triss with this short hair, I was like, it's Jennifer Lawrence! And I would think their management teams would be a little bit more careful about keeping them appearing separate. I mean, I think Shailene Woodley's more so than Jennifer Lawrence is. Jennifer Lawrence, I saw a headline the other day saying she'd become the most bankable female star, beating Sandra Bullock, knocking Sandra Bullock off the top of the list. And that's amazing. That's an amazing accomplishment. Jennifer Lawrence can do anything she wants. And I think Shailene Woodley, who has a lot of critical success, but not so much commercial success, for some reason I think she's having a hard time getting out of Jennifer Lawrence's shadow, you would think her management team would be aware of that specific problem and be trying to facilitate that. But I don't know, or maybe they're scared. Maybe they're like, this is working so far. People confusing the two or thinking they're very similar. Why should we cut that cord when maybe it is helping Shailene Woodley more than we imagine? So I'm curious, what do you think of the move to have Insurgent in 3D? Is it just, a financial decision, or do you think it's going to make the movie cooler to watch? And what do you think of the motion posters? Do you like the characters as much as the special effects in those? And were they fun to watch? And also, your thoughts on Shailene Woodley versus Jennifer Lawrence. And if the final Hunger Games should be in 3D. I'd be curious to what you think about that. All right, so what's the other movie franchise that tried to make some headlines? Well, that was Terminator Genisys. Now, we'll have more photos to talk about either tomorrow or Monday, depending when they make the photos from this Entertainment Weekly spotlight issue available online for us to discuss. But this Friday, tomorrow, Entertainment Weekly is releasing a special issue all about Terminator Genisys. And so to get some buzz for it, yesterday they released the 2 covers. So we see them here, and I think it's very interesting that Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't on either cover. Well, just his bones are. You can see the skeleton of a T-800 there on the second cover behind Jason Clarke and Matt Smith. But no Schwarzenegger on the posters, and on the covers. And I would say, hey, to the producers of Terminator Genisys, if you don't think he should be on the covers to celebrate this movie, then maybe he shouldn't be in your movie. I mean, they're saying it's some kind. I think they're not saying it's a technical reboot because maybe they're saying something messed up with the timeline to change it again. So when you deal with the Terminator films, because it's a time travel series, you can maybe therefore get away with never claiming to do a reboot. It's just, it's the same story. It's just time's changed it again. Crazy, but they're changing quite a bit. And I think that they should have just totally broken away. I think either celebrate that Schwarzenegger is still in these movies or get rid of him and cast a new T-800. I think that, Schwarzenegger has had a lot of problems at the box office. He carries a lot of personal baggage at this point. And James Cameron's not here. I think that was a really successful team, and I think Schwarzenegger has a hard time working with other directors. Just doesn't get the same results. So I think I would have cast somebody else. Byung-Hun Lee is in this movie as another Terminator. I think that's very cool. And I would have preferred him to maybe even just be the T-800. But we'll see how it turns out. But hey, if he's in your movie, he's in your movie. Own up to it. So one of the big reveals here, though, before we get any photos, is twist number 1 that they've revealed about the movie. A lot of changes are being done to the story here. So you tell me how you feel about this down below, and I'll tell you how I feel about it right now. So the twist is, Sarah Connor is not, as they say in this article, an innocent like she was in the original Terminator directed by and dreamed up by James Cameron. Instead, she is a young woman who was orphaned by Terminators at the age of 9 and therefore was raised by Schwarzenegger's T-800, who was sent back in time to program to guard, not to kill. So that right there makes you wonder, are we going to have our first pacifist Terminator? That could be interesting. But he's raised her whole life, and she calls him Pops. And my first reaction was, so wait a minute, you're just making Cable and Hope the movie? That's the exact storyline right there. Time traveling, stoic older guy, raises teenage girl, schools her in the art of assassinry and fighting, and that's exactly what this Terminator Genisys is going with. So I guess the idea is that, all these things didn't work, so Skynet's like, well, let's just kill Sarah Connor when she's a kid. That'll be easier. And then they kill her parents, and so they change the timeline yet again. I guess it makes sense to some degree, but just how many times can we reboot the story? Even Skynet's got to be getting, I guess, they're fighting for survival, but the stakes aren't quite as high for us moviegoers. And then now, of course, Jai Courtney's Kyle Reese comes back, and I guess, now the plan is he has to make John Connor by impregnating Sarah Connor. I think that John Connor is getting kind of creepy at this point when you think about it, that he's just orchestrating his mother's entire life from the future. He's like, I'm going to send back your dad, now I'm going to send back your lover and my dad, okay, just so I can make sure I stay alive. So I'm curious what you think of this twist. I would just go for a plain old-fashioned reboot, I wish. And I just think these are really, really hard shoes to fill. I mean, obviously no one has to fill Schwarzenegger's because he won't go away, but Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor is one of the greatest, I think, movie roles of all time. It's like trying to get a new Ellen Ripley. It's like you just can't do it. With all due respect oh my goodness, Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones, it's just really a tall order. And also I have to say, Emilia Clarke, not the most beloved character on Game of Thrones. I feel if she didn't have those dragons, she wouldn't be nearly as cool. And all those guys going after her. I think her story is more interesting than her as a character personally. And actually, I think she's often quite annoying. So I think that I loved the Sarah Connor Chronicles on Fox, that television show. I thought that was really great. And I thought that Lena Headey did a great job as that Sarah Connor. But you know what? She wasn't the star of that series. That was the relationship with John Connor and Summer Glau's Terminator, which was really fascinating and really interesting to watch develop. And I feel bad that that series got canceled. I still feel bad about it. So I think it can be done. You can build out the Terminator mythology, but I think you have to do it by breaking out of the main storyline. And I wish that's what this movie was doing. And also, Matt Smith here, he's on the cover, the second cover with Jason Clarke as John Connor, and he obviously, is a mystery character. They even say, who is he? I guess Entertainment Weekly learned their lesson from when they accidentally said that Benedict Cumberbatch was Khan on their cover. So we'll see, but I don't know. Matt Smith has a large following of Doctor Who fans, but I don't know if they're enough to affect the box office overall. We'll see. But just write down below what you think of these two covers. What do you think of these changes to the franchise? Do you have any hope for Terminator Genisys whatsoever? All right, so the third story is Michael Bay is still searching, I think, for respect. Kind of like what Steven Spielberg did with Schindler's List. He made a lot of great blockbusters, but then he really wanted the respect of his peers in the industry. And he got it in spades with Schindler's List. Classic film, really well done, huge Oscar winner. And I think Michael Bay is trying to do the same. He tried with Pain and Gain. I loved Pain and Gain. I thought it was a fabulous movie. I think he was a little disrespectful of portraying the murders of real people in the film, and he got hung up on that. The movie got hung up on it. People complained about that, and I think it put a pall over what was a really good film and had a lot of interesting things to say about, American greed and something for nothing, and the way the country's, evolved a little bit in that regard, which, is partially the fault of the media. I have very strong feelings about that. But it was a good movie. But now Michael Bay is in talks to direct a Benghazi film, about the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2012 that, killed an ambassador for the United States and, actually were very tragic. Now you've heard this in the news not only when it happened, but then you might recall that last year Lara Logan over at 60 Minutes tried to cover the story and actually dug up a false witness who was fabricating his story. It's largely believed. And people felt she wasn't diligent enough in checking out her sources, and because the report was so damning towards particularly, I believe, Hillary Clinton and, just the way the whole thing was handled, a lot of crap rained down on Lara Logan, and she had to take 60 minutes, she had to take a break from 60 Minutes, much more than 60 Minutes. She had to take a 6-month break from 60 Minutes as a result of that. But she's back now. It was really kind of like a pretty hard slap on the wrist, but a slap on the wrist nonetheless. But Benghazi is a tough issue. Now, in the trades, they're saying that it's going to be like a Black Hawk Down movie, and I would say no. I would liken it to Paul Greengrass's films like United 93 and Green Zone, because this is a very political issue, particularly because of Hillary Clinton's involvement and that she's likely running for president coming up. So how far is the Benghazi story, the movie, going to go? Is it just going to show it from the military standpoint? Is it going to tie in the response from the State Department, which people do feel is mishandled? It's a very touchy subject, a little bit like American Sniper coming out later this year. There's politics involved, ideologies. Where do you stand? It's not just a story of a mission. Now, there are two questions here. One, can that do well? Paul Greengrass had a lot of success with Captain Phillips, but that was, a really clear-cut story. And again, United 93 and Green Zone, not tremendous box office successes or even critical successes. They just kind of came and went. And I think that could be a real concern for a Benghazi movie, particularly one directed by Michael Bay. Because while I'm sure he can handle all the explosions in the movie quite well, it's going to have some really crazy battle sequences, obviously, because the assault on this compound was devastating. That's why it was such a horrible event. But can he handle the deeper elements of the story, the political? Does he have the deft touch to do that? We'll see. I don't know. I like Michael Bay. I have a love-hate relationship with Michael Bay. I think like most people. Like most people, I have a love-hate relationship with him. I think he makes some great movies, and then he always does something kind of personally disgusting where I'm like, Michael Bay, why? Why Michael Bay? But then he always gets me back in the theater. But I don't know. I liked what he did with Pain and Gain. I thought he did handle a lot of subtlety and nuances there quite well, but I don't know if people want to see Michael Bay do it, even if he can. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. Let's go to the viewer question from Marcus Luera. And Marcus, regular BTT viewer, frequent commenter, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with his name in the comment section. And Marcus says, "Hello, Grace, I have a question for you. with the overwhelming success of Tuesday's event, do you think Marvel needs a con? By that he means comic book convention. They had a lackluster San Diego Comic-Con, and they rebounded nicely with their own event. So with their total dominance of Tuesday and probably the week, why go to a convention when they have to share the news cycle for the day and then share headlines? They have proven they can do it all on their own. They took out the last week in October and made it exciting for movie fans. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. Thanks, smiley face. Great question, and I think that I don't think that Marvel, not only does Marvel not need a comic book convention to make their big announcements, but I think they are aware of that. I think that it wasn't just an accidental lackluster San Diego Comic-Con for them. I think they intentionally and purposely held back. And they knew that the big announcements they had pending, and so I think they felt they could take the hit, you know, with people like myself being very disappointed in their panel, because they knew that this was coming probably in October once they had maybe a couple last few pieces in place. And I think that they want to make their own headlines. As Marcus says, they dominated the day. They're probably going to dominate the week. It was tremendous. They had, you know, they controlled the event. They controlled the hype going into it with their mystery, you know, invitation that went out on Friday. They just was brilliantly orchestrated, and I think that they knew this and they don't want to participate in Comic-Con. I think it's a conscious decision to take Marvel out of that race, because they don't need to. They're going to rise above it. But I think that only Marvel, so the question is this the end of comic book conventions as you know, a big announcement ground for movies as it's become? I mean, there have been rumblings about comic book conventions moving away from comics and more towards pop culture in general. I mean, I think San Diego Comic-Con is called a pop culture celebrating the popular arts. I like that a lot. I like referring to comics and the like as popular arts. I think that's very cool, but let's face it, just a select part of the popular arts. And I've had a number of people say, you know, even when you go to San Diego Comic-Con, they divide the floor up between like television and movies and comic books, and then there's like sales booths at the far end, and it's like the section in the middle is the emptiest with the comics. Everybody's buying stuff over at those booths at one end, and then looking at the movie and TV stuff at the other end of the convention. And I think only Marvel's been able to pull people into the comic book zone by having their big stage and having their talent show up on their stages. They build a really nice convention booth because they put a big stage in it and a focus point, whereas DC hasn't done that so far. It's been more come in, walk around, and then you leave. And DC really needs to start stepping up their game. I mean, they're great at making a headline, but also one has to wonder, after Kevin Feige did this, how long is it going to take Warner Brothers to realize they need a Kevin Feige? They need someone who sits there and just, their whole job is to say, how can I impress the fans? How can I give the fans what they want? And I think that's largely what Kevin Feige does. He, you know, but with measured control. He's not just doing fan service. I think he's trying to balance a lot of different plates. He's also trying to meet actor demands with Robert Downey Jr. most specifically. And also Disney. I think he probably gets a lot of directives from the parent company at this point. So I think that Warner Brothers really needs that person who's going to come up with the idea for this press conference and run it, as Kevin Feige did. Although he didn't get a lot of personal coverage on this. I mean, a lot of the photos that went out were all about that cool board that they made, you know, to show the graphic on the screen, and also, of course, Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, and Chadwick Boseman standing together on the stage. But not a lot of close-up shots of Feige. He should fix that. He's in charge. He should make sure a photo of himself is released, probably standing. Why wouldn't they do a photo with Downey Jr., Evans, Boseman, and Feige? So that's one area where he could improve a little bit. But there's not much room for improvement because it's pretty awesome. But I think that Marvel and DC are the only ones who can break away from comic book conventions at this point. I think because they're the only ones who have properties with this intense fan interest, maybe Hunger Games as well. I think, you know, but that's not going to go on indefinitely. And that's another thing that favors Marvel and DC. They are making announcements for like 5 years out. You know, Marvel says they have movies planned until 2028, DC through 2020. So they can go and make these huge announcements. Although, as they really race to get attention now, they're going to hit a wall where they can't announce things too much further out. So there's always layers of casting announcements, costumes. You know, they can find a way. But right now, they're not saving anything. They're putting it all out there on the table as they compete for people's audience's attention. So I thought the only other studios that could potentially put on such an event are Legendary, and then also Fox with their Marvel properties. You know, why not do a big X-Men reveal like this? Or why not do something about, the Kaiju world, cinematic universe they're building over at Legendary? That was a pretty good headline out of Comic-Con. But I don't quite think that they're there yet because I think the fan base isn't there. I think, people liked Godzilla, they didn't love it. I think people loved X-Men Days of Future Past, but there's still a lot of bad taste in people's mouths from some of the other X-Men films. I think those franchises aren't in a great spot in terms of quality or reassurance from audiences. So I think they still need Comic-Con to help boost their announcements. So I think only Marvel and DC can afford to break out. Maybe Hunger Games, as I said, but I think everybody else is going to need the comic book conventions. However, I would say that if Marvel isn't going to utilize Comic-Con and they want to focus on making all their announcements independently or at D23, they need to not come to Comic-Con, because I think it's not any fun to make people sit in Hall H and show up to give them nothing. Or, you know what, just do signings at the booths, at their booth. Just do a signing at the booth. Don't do a Hall H presentation. If you're going to go to Hall H, you have to do something in Hall H. I think that's really should be a hard and fast rule, because, as great as it is now, I think Marvel has hurt themselves at comic conventions. I think people, if they had to choose, wouldn't stand online for a big Marvel event anymore at San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con, because they should know at this point they're not going to get anything big out of it. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you for your question, Marcus. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.